what's life like?
It's pretty much common knowledge that it takes at least 20 shells to have a community. My cousin fell asleep in a pocket, and that's why I don't like the saying everything comes out in the wash. Because sometimes it doesn't, or sometimes it does, and they're just like a completely different person. So it's actually only 2 of us now. Myself and my grandmother, Nana Connie. We like to watch 60 Minutes because Leslie Stahl is fearless. Nana, make the noise.
Tick, 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 tick.
Sometimes I find my mind wandering, thinking, what would my family think? Do you think they could be out there?
Marcello, let's forget about being afraid. Just take the adventure.
Okay, let's do it.
So I'd like to introduce the woman with the company behind that film, and Jennifer Strachan. Jennifer Strachan is CEO of Cinereach. Anyone know about Cinereach? All right. For those of you who don't, you are about to be in for a real treat. So she leads a creative team towards a very, very ambitious goal to harness the transformative power of story to inspire greater curiosity, agency, and empathy. I think empathy is a big part of that. I now have a lot of empathy for a little shell. I don't know how that happened. Her career spans over 30 years as a nationally recognized leader, speaker, strategist, and Emmy award-winning storyteller. Her extensive leadership experience includes media, including television, radio, digital content, documentary, and series production. Prior to Cinereach, Jennifer contributed to both NPR and Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So join me, I'm up in these director chairs. Wouldn't be a movie thing. I know.
Hi there.
So I know we wanted to talk just a tiny bit about why Marcel the Shell. Why did you want to show that clip?
Because he's adorable, first of all. Thank you very much for noticing. So we love Marcel in sort of the new iteration of Cinereach, and I'm going to talk about here for a minute. But he is sort of, first of all, the ultimate systems thinker, which we are systems thinkers at Cinereach. But he's also a bit of a disruptive thinker. So if any of you have seen Little Marcel, he kind of thinks about the world differently. He thinks about problems differently, and he thinks about community differently, right? So we kind of love him as our little creative spokesperson, and it's kind of like if we could take Jenny Slate, who's the voice of Marcel, and translate that into how we would love people to think about problems and ideas and family and community differently. It's like Marcel is hilarious. He's adorable. He's funny. This is one of his quotes. Here's another one that I love. He's just a big thinker. He talks also about like hang gliding on a Dorito and doing some of those things. So if you haven't seen the movie, it's really, really great. So it is part of the Cinereach that was very much focused on film. We've transitioned a bit since then, and we're going to talk about that.
Great. No, I think it's so cute. And I love the idea that you've got a philosophical shell. And I think it's worth saying that it's not just a film, it was an award-winning film.
Yes, nominated for an Oscar. Gosh, has it been 2 years ago? Yes, absolutely fantastic. We've had a couple of films back in the day. Beast of the Southern Wild was a Cinereach film, also nominated for an Oscar. So we've got a great history of understanding powerful stories that have other narratives attached to them. And so the new Cinereach kind of wants to take on that, build from it, and create a whole bunch of new ideas. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it's not just documentaries, which I think a lot of people think about when they think about social impact entertainment.
Exactly. So all of you have seen, and I'm curious, we have a question for you. When you think about stories or character, could be either, that have really changed the way you think about something. It could be how you think about yourself, could be how you feel about the world, it could be anything, could be subtle. So I've got a million of these, and I know you probably do too. Mine, I'm going to start it off, and I'd love to hear from some of you. If any of you are bold enough to give me your answers, I have some Cinereach swag for you. So be thinking, is there anything in your mind, a story, something? So the one that just came to mind last night, and I've got a billion, are broadcast news, Holly Hunter, the late great William Yeah, Hurt. That show, first of all, it got me really excited about journalism, but more than that, it was the female lead in Holly Hunter, and she was a badass, and she was amazing. And the way she handled conflict, I hadn't ever seen anything like it in leadership and thinking about doing something cool in the world, like being a journalist. And I was like, oh, you can do that? That's something you could do. And it seems crazy, and I kind of like crazy, and it really shaped who I was as a person.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
What about
that's
you?
Cool.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's so deep. I'm trying to think if I should change my answer now. Because I was going to say, as far as change the way I think and do things, I know this sounds crazy, but Terminator 2.
Why? Tell me. I'm dying to know.
Linda Hamilton is such a badass.
Yeah.
And I also had always thought that I don't want to do weightlifting. I don't want to, do all this. I got into self-defense. I started to do weightlifting. I just saw it as cool. And up until then, that was not cool to me. And I got a whole bunch of gals, and self-defense I just thought she was amazing.
Yes.
And I wouldn't have seen a woman like that before. So
Right. So those are some of the even just the low-hanging fruit of representation, but then getting into something that you don't even know it changed your mind or your attitude. Who's brave enough to share? Any story? Yes. Please.
So recently, my goddaughter had her 9th birthday, and she wanted to have a spa party with 18 of her other 9-year-old friends. And when I was thinking about putting this thing together, the movie that came to mind was True Beverly Hills. I don't know if you all remember that.
yeah, totally.
True Beverly Hills with Shelley Long.
Yeah.
And she was the do you remember that movie? Mm-hmm. No?
Oh,
okay, you do.
No, I do. Yeah.
Fair
I watched that
enough.
movie.
But she put on a cape, and she was fabulous, and she still led the Girl Scout troop the way she was going to lead it, and I will never forget that character.
Amazing. Love it. Love it. Thank you for being brave. Who else? Oh, we've got one here. Yes.
In the movie,
Microphone right here.
oh, I'm sorry. In the movie Hoop Dreams, there's a moment when Arthur, he's going to take a foul shot, and if he makes it, his life will go in one direction, and if he doesn't make it, it'll go in the other direction. And that moment, I always think is like that's such a powerful to capture that, but that a film could sort of show you that just a moment can change a life.
Exactly. And okay, one more. Perfect.
So when I was about 15, I went to a film festival and I saw Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders and then decided to become a filmmaker, which I never made. I didn't become a filmmaker, but that was my goal in life was to become a filmmaker from Wim Wenders.
Wow.
Amazing.
Well, hey, you're in the room with a lot of people. Boaz might be interested. Let's see.
Exactly. And so that's part of the reason we are using this example is that those are just even top level of thinking about the power of story and how it can just make you think differently at a top level. So imagine if we started to do much of what Heather was talking about and infuse other kinds of narratives, other kinds of social change issues, and not in a way that we've maybe even historically done it, in a way that you just talked about, just by showing different issues and uncovering different themes and narratives that aren't even as obvious, but that can be inspiring and entertaining and joyful and all of those things. There's enormous power.
Well, and I know you and I spoke a lot about why story. So why story, which I touched on a little bit around, we're not crying over white papers, but why do you find story being such a powerful mover for cultural change?
Yes, and by the way, thank you for Heather and I, when we first met, we both have a mutual, it's not even a disdain for white papers. It's just there's more to life than white papers. That's all it is. So I really appreciate you preaching to the choir on that. So one of the things at Cinereach that we talk about, I've just got a few things here to show you that kind of help illustrate the point. So a lot of folks in the room absolutely know this, but you would be surprised that folks that work within a lot of social change areas that don't think about the world this way, which our whole conceit and theory of change is that change really happens through culture, and there is no change without cultural change, right? And so you have to change culture, and the way you do that is through stories. It's just the way it is. From the beginning of time till now, and however you consume content, storytelling is how you change hearts and minds. So if you're really in this hearts and minds business, really thinking of a creative way to do that is the point. So a couple of things. I developed Star Wars, so forgive the Star Wars. Everybody, I've learned that not everybody loves Star Wars as much as I do, but I use it to my advantage.
What?
I learned it's a very American thing.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
I thought it was a global phenomenon, but I was corrected. So I use this in the spirit of basically all good things in Star Wars. So if you look at on the left, thinking about the idea of traditional impact storytelling. So lots of folks in this space, you may know something like this. So that's Luke. That's the Jedi. Jedi are good. Jedi are working really, really hard. But in this is old Luke, you may remember if you're a Star Wars fan. And he's kind of confronting some of his, like, oh, I've been doing it this way, and yet the evil parts, the dark side still rises. So impact storytelling is definitely a force for good. They're all Jedis, but they're a little bit more narrowly focused. So impact storytelling could be across a ton of different mediums. It could take any form. It's usually a little more narrowly focused, issue-oriented, impact toward a specific goal. Way on the other side, there's popular entertainment. Neither good nor bad, but an incredible force, right? So Cinereach is somewhere in between, where we're also, hopefully and theoretically, a force for good, but we have much different goals. Our goals are much more systems-focused. We're really looking at trying to revolutionize story's role in lasting change and what that looks like. So when we look at that, so part of the way we think about systems change in relation to storytelling and entertainment is this idea toward trying to really invest in those narratives that we can identify where are things currently happening that we can build momentum toward lasting change. We like to talk about this as sort of the domino theory of in all of the things we want to accomplish in the world, Cinereach is trying to find where's the domino, which is the role story can play in this, and how can we see what's happening in the current landscape and then push that domino to build momentum toward a larger cultural shift. It's very hard to do that with one-off ideas, and so we're trying to find where's the best intervention point where story can play a role and push this forward. So one of the great things that I love, this slide seems to resonate with folks because it seems that's an audacious goal, right? That's a big idea. Well, you're trying to shift culture with your little story. How's that going to work? Well, it turns out when you talk about the tipping point theory, if you're all familiar with it, you really only need to get 25% of any given group, audience, or whatever to buy in to what you're trying to shift, and they'll take it from there. I found that to be an incredible relief, and that I leaned into that. A lot of folks have felt really good about that. So story, if you're thinking about, well, how do we reach all the folks? We want to figure out what is the movement, what is the idea, and how do we reach at least 25%, still a big number, but they can do the rest of the heavy lifting for us.
Well, and I find that inspiring because I think for funders and programs, when you're thinking about, okay, what's our film going to do? How many eyeballs? 25%. That seems reasonable.
Yeah.
And especially when you're looking at direct to audience, all these ways of building audiences, that seems achievable. It doesn't have to be a Marvel movie.
Exactly.
To make change.
Right.
So what has changed? I know you talked about your process changing as you had a previous process and how it's kind of moving along, especially with regards to technology.
Right.
So where would you say you were, and then where has this now evolved to?
Right. So again, for about 15 plus years, we were a film foundation and production company. And our founder had a vision at some point where he thought, this is amazing, but what could we add to this to really have more impact? Because the indie film community, which we've been deeply invested in and loved and still love, we thought, well, what else is there? How can we further this work and take it into different mediums? And so then we thought, well, then how do you identify what those opportunities are in those narratives? So basically, we've kind of flipped the script. We've turned it the other way, which is historically we've thought about, who are the storytellers and the story makers, and what do they want to do that's working on these amazing different levels of film? And then how do we take the issue first, right? And we think about, what are the problems that need to be solved? Why are they not getting solved? What can we understand about those issues, and then uncover the role that story can play? And so what we learn in that process through our own research, so we do our own research, is that could be wildly different than what we think it is. And it might be a film, but it might be a television show. It might be a social media series. It might be a graphic novel. So we're doing all of those things. Sometimes our research points us exactly what we thought, and sometimes it's like, oh, actually, this storyline is leading more toward an interactive environment. And so we've been jumping into storytelling in gaming. We've been thinking about that. This particular narrative is probably for an audience under 30. It needs to be shorter. So now we're working on a social media series. So we've really tried to kind of reverse imagine what the story is, rather than coming with a fixed mindset of it's definitely a film, to say, here's the issue, here's the theme of what we want to get, and where would that best be applied and activated.
Well, I find that fascinating because a lot of folks do start with, we're going to do a film, and then they reverse from there. And starting with the issue and saying, how would entertainment work? What does a story need? What platform best suits the story to get to the outcome you want? And that, to me, is a really interesting and very systematic way of approaching it. So
Exactly. And I think one of the things we can all agree to, which is one of the reasons I really loved Heather's approach, I love how we've started this day, is that what entertainment can do, and again, I come from being a documentary filmmaker, doing all of those things, and I still love that, and that's for a very specific audience. But when you're trying to think about shifting hearts and minds, because part of what we're talking about is shifting culture, so to shift culture more broadly, you have to appeal to a different side of folks. And again, story is that universal connector, but also through the lens of awe, wonder, laughter, curiosity. You mentioned something in there about alternative futures. You paint a picture for folks where it's like, I want to go toward this. This is a really interesting thing. A lot, as you all know, a lot of the work that's been done tends to lean a little heavy, a little more toward doom and gloom. And what we know is those can be effective for very specific audience, but for mass cultural change, they don't work. It's been proven. So what we know now is entertainment. There's a real opportunity there to reimagine through those lenses and think, how could we talk about, justice through a buddy comedy? How could we think about climate change by, thinking about a reality show, those kinds of things. Right. So it's breaking the mold. And part of what we are completely okay with, which I've noticed is harder for some folks, is letting go of some of the ego and the beauty of doing it a certain way. I'm a former a recovering creative, so I know we get stuck in our own ways of like, but I really wanted to make this thing. Right. So we're just letting go of what is that. And also, people may never know that Cinereach was behind anything, and that's perfectly fine. That's not our goal. We're not about even the end user may never know, but if we can inspire not only change among the person who consumes the content, but really moving the storytelling ecosystem to think about story differently. Ultimately, our goal is that story is more widely utilized in this way and that we can be instructive in helping people understand that.
Well, and it really breaks out from the documentary world because, again, documentaries are great, white papers are great, all these things are good. We don't want to get rid of them. But, crying over a shell is a lot different than what I might think I would do in a given day, or a character. And I'm writing a rom-com and I have a sustainability through line. I mean, I think creating these really interesting counterintuitive juxtapositions are what kind of awaken our curiosity.
Yes.
And awaken our empathy, because that's why I like Star Trek, because you can empathize with an alien that is doing something, whereas maybe if you see somebody that reminds you of someone you don't like, maybe I'm not going to have as much empathy. Right,
exactly. Well, and let me tell you the thing that really, I remember the very first person when I got this job 2 years ago, I had some family members going, so what are we talking about here? Are we talking about you're hiding the vegetables, you're going to sneak some secret message in your movie? And I'm like, no, but I figured out the answer that resonates with me and more people, which is it's absolutely not that. In fact, I would say it's the opposite of sneaking the vegetables in, because what we're not looking to, like, I'm going to secretly tell you the message I want you to hear. We are actually exploring what is common among us, right? So what are those shared values across culture, across demographics? And that's sort of what we're trying to uncover is what's the same between you and I. We probably would find some things and you'd think, well, no, you try and think of a demographic, certain groups of folks, you're like, I don't have anything in common. You do. You may, you both care about family. You both want autonomy in some way. Maybe you're both interested in having agency and power over certain things. You'd be shocked at how many things are more common between us. And so we're not trying to think about how do we sneak our message in. We're trying to explore what are those common values that then we can look at the power of story within that to connect us. And then you can create all sorts of stories around that, about both our need of family and autonomy, and that we all want power, whatever that is, to explore that with story. Then that's a universal thing. I'm not tricking you. So that's sort of the twist on it, is it's not a message I want to give to people, but I'm trying to find what is the message that all of us want and need, and weave that into the broader narratives. Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's more palatable to a lot of people as opposed to heavy-handed. What I call sometimes the name, shame, blame game, as you've just said, and is proven with evidence, does not work. We can't name, shame, and blame people into changing. And so I think, entertainment is a way that is effective and accelerates that change. I would be remiss if I did not ask you about your newest project, especially as we're seated at the UN around civic leadership, which I think a lot of us could say is needed right now.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that project.
Happy to. I've got just a couple of slides here. So one of our biggest projects that started even before I got to Cinereach a few years ago was around civic leadership and narratives of leadership. So one of the things our research uncovered through a partnership with a Partnership for Public Service is that in all of the media portrayals of public leaders, they fall into one of two categories: that they're either corrupt or inept, they're fools, they're, all of these different things. It's really stark, and there's been some progress in that, but a lot of the historic leaders and characters within film and television have fallen into one of those categories. So what we know now is also the research was people do not see that they have any agency in civic leadership. So if you want to change culture, they're like, well, I'm not going to run for, larger office, Senate, whatever. They don't have any understanding of the layers of civic leadership or government, that there was literally this enormous gap in knowledge and understanding. And what do you mean? And what is that? And that's sort of that domino of, we realized if there was a way for people to better understand all the layers of civic leadership and feel that they could be interested and empowered, then that's how you shift, build momentum, shift culture. So, all of our research led us to, okay, the most powerful group we can try and impact is below 30, and to do a social media series. So you can't tell by these slides. These are civic leaders, but it's going to be funny. There's nothing here. There's not a lot to say. So what we have is a social media series coming probably within the next 3 or 4 months. It highlights, I'm going to try and encapsulate it very quickly. So we're using social media influencers. They're going to go spend time with folks in a variety of civic service jobs. So it could be somebody, there's like a beekeeper here, like in agriculture, somebody who's working on storm chasing, whatever, and just being like, hey, tell me about your job, what's going on, and really put a face and a life to what does it look like to work within government. And that's all sorts of things. There's all sorts of layers, and what does that look like? Humanizing those people, but making it fun. And at the end, those influencers will go through sort of a game show style of like, what did you learn? Would you want to do this job? Is that something? So we're starting out with this just as an experiment to see, so is this going to work? And so one of the beautiful things about Cinereach is in that incubation process, we might learn, oh, well, this part worked, didn't really go, why? Learn, go make it again, try it again. So that's sort of the incubation part. So really excited about this one. That's coming soon, and we've had a lot of really great interest from folks, and we're hoping to learn a lot from it. The next one that we'll be looking at, this is not the title, that's very boring, but this is about a different kind of series that we're working on with some of our former Cinereach alum. We've got amazing creators and directors in our network. These are about folks that have done amazing things in civic leadership. So the Sammys are an award that basically does these really high-profile awards for people who have done amazing work. We're trying to figure out how can we actually now create almost like mini films out of who these people are, and just have the creators walk us through what would that look like, who are these people, and to help reflect that back to. So this is sort of a two different, pronged approach to the same idea. But in tandem with that later, if you ever want to know about it, we're also, again, working on within the gaming space, graphic novels, and have a whole bunch of other things. So these are just the two things that are coming up next. So thanks for asking.
But again, really creative platforming. That's what I like about it, is it doesn't have to just be film, doesn't have to just be TV. Part of what we did with the Impact Lounge, Changemakers Meet Filmmakers, it's a little sexy to say filmmakers, but it's all types of media that can be used for stories and entertainment, especially now.
Yeah. And if I ever, meet folks that are kind of bound to film, and it's like, we all kind of grew up, a lot of us in this room, we grew up on film. I certainly did. We have some of our most beloved characters. I just mentioned one, that's a movie. But I've also found as the world changes, and as people get attached to characters, there's so many different ways that people can learn to love stories. So if we can let go that needs to be in a certain medium and know that there's so many ways to get our messages out through storytelling, through fiction, through telling other people's stories, through being funny, having a good time, there is so much more possibility if we're open to it. And, to me, a good storyteller is a good storyteller. So if you love film, I always say, there's so many different ways to apply that gift to being able to tell stories that I think is universally impactful.
Absolutely. So we could take one or two questions
Okay, yes.
if we'd
if
like
anybody
to.
has any questions.
Yeah.
Yes, right here in front.
All right.
Are you working
transmedia strategy amongst filmmaking, immersive, and gaming?
Well, so what I would say is almost everything that we think about has all of that potential. So thinking about it, as everybody, if you're in the creative world, you know that almost every project, if you start at the beginning, so our graphic novel is a great example, that the whole idea behind that is ultimately they want to make a TV series. But this is a really good way to test out the creative on that, see what the story is, understand that. A lot of folks, as you well know, then if that's a TV series, that could become something else. So absolutely, yes. And in fact, there's something interesting about this particular project that what we're testing here is what else can we learn that would apply to other platforms. I think the way we think about that slightly differently is rather than assuming we know what all the platforms are up front, that's part of the incubation, is we're saying, well, we know we think we want to make this next, but let's see what happens with that. Do folks respond in that way? Oh, well, actually, we should have thought of this based on the reaction. Let's apply that next. So yes, and not necessarily as pre-prescribed.
You gave the excellent example of the civic leadership, and I'm just curious to know what other sort of cultural momentum opportunities you're most excited to build on, or what you've done in the past that you feel has been historically most effective.
Well, so great question. There's so much. In fact, so we have a couple of things that we've been focused on beyond civic leadership. We just did a game jam. If you ever want to learn what game jams are, I learned a lot. It's a whole other story, but on climate sustainability. So we're deeply working within that space. We're doing several workshops right now. We're doing deeper research on that. We've worked one of our original workshops that started long before we even had a formal process was around just a whole idea around justice and how do we understand our justice, our relationship to justice and injustice. And that also, ironically, led us to gaming. And we had another game jam at South by Southwest last year, which was a game jam for justice. Now, within those categories, there's a million different ways we can go down there, go down those paths. But what I would say is all of the things that we're exploring sort of lead us to other things. So we're not narrowing, although part of me, that's one of the things we're exploring because we're open to so many things. There's a lot of things to explore. So whether it'll be that way forever, I'm not sure.
Thanks. So interesting. And we're from the consumer goods industry. And so I'm just wondering, how have you thought, obviously it depends upon the medium that you're working within, the different ways you're thinking about integrations with other corporations, brands, how you tell these stories. We have Marvel waffles. Why couldn't you have civic leader waffles and things like that? And think about those types of fun integrations about storytelling. What are kind of your dreams in that type of way of advancing the story?
Oh my God, Marvel. That's the greatest. Well, so we are, in fact, I just had a conversation earlier about this, about the idea of brands. So, and just the integration of so there's a couple of levels of what you're saying that resonate with me. So there are levels there's brand storytelling and there's brands being associated and supporting sort of this storytelling, right? And so what we've found is there are so many great brands in the world that really want to be in relationship with or support or be a part of or influence these kind of stories. So we're actively looking at that, and that's something we are interested in. I think when we look at some of these iconic, like Barbie's the greatest example of that, like iconic, long-lasting, and what that is it is about the brand, but it's about people's relationship to something that they can identify with. One of the reasons we believe in the research, there's tons of articles written on it, is that's a universal character that transcends age, all sorts of demographics, and was universally, now there's a whole marketing thing behind that, of course, that made it especially useful, but those kinds of ideas where we're trying to find is there a universal brand or idea or company or something that lends itself to story, but that also the brands out there, that are really interested in partnering. So I would say we're definitely open to that, and that's an emerging area for us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, and I mean, you get my mind thinking immediately, there's so many tie-ins, but you're right, whether it's brand tie-in is different than story necessarily. I mean, because I think of the Wheaties boxes when I was a kid, right? Every hero was on the Wheaties box, every sport hero. That was just where they went. That's where they popped up. But it wasn't as narratively connected to a story. It was more of placement.
Right.
And I think involving that story, I think if there's a and I forget which one it is, I need more coffee, but a story about a cookie that was baked, and it gets really hot, and it's climate change in a sense. And it's now that's an interesting story, but it's a product, it's a cookie, obviously it was cooked. But I think that, and those two things are a little different.
Yeah. Great. Any other? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the funding space, impact storytelling, because former participant employees, social media storytelling, RIP participant, New York Times shut down documentaries, CNN Films has shut down. There's a number of organizations and groups that used to fund this kind of work that no longer do. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how the funding landscape has changed.
Well, so great question, and you probably have thoughts about this as well. But so there's a couple of things there. There's sort of how do funders feel about it, and then there's sort of the landscape of what has traditionally been funded. I think so. The demise of some of these things are super troubling, by the way. But one of the things that happened when somebody, for example, when Participant closed its doors, it was like, I see both the opportunity and how we can position ourselves maybe slightly differently in how they're thinking about it, because I think a lot of funders are wanting sort of the one-to-one with their dollars and their investment. They want to make it back in this space, not all funders. And so what we're trying to explore is within that framework of those kinds of organizations, how can we add the value and help them understand what that is without that sense of, so, we're not a double bottom line organization, so we are a true nonprofit. So because we have that, it's a little bit, we're looking for those kinds of funders and investors that are willing to go on that longer term journey with us and investing in the idea of change rather than the movie, the TV show itself. So that's a shift. So what I would say is, rather than folks that are interested in investing in, those are separate investors, by the way, who want to invest in your specific project. But if you're talking about really philanthropists in the funding landscape, there are some amazing people who are kind of becoming more and more open to the idea of really shifting hearts and minds through this kind of work. But that's hard. So what I would say is what we've explored is that those folks are kind of learning what does it mean to not have, well, Jennifer, you want to make this thing, but give me exactly what it's going to do in what amount of time. I can't do that yet, but I can say, here's what we're going to explore. Here's what we're going to try and learn again, and here's the ultimate outcome we hope to get to. That's a longer process. What I'm finding with funders, and I'm just sure there's folks in the room who could help me know even more about that. But it's definitely there. The interest is there, but it's complicated based on all of those other factors, and the fact that it's asking them to have a level of trust and buy-in to really social change more than the bottom line of what are they going to make. I don't know if that answers your question. That's kind of tricky. Yeah.
And I would agree. I mean, there are people in this room and that you'll hear from that are far more experts about this than I am. But I would say in my anecdotal vision is that what we're seeing is, and part of the reason that I started this is to get funders more interested in this as an opportunity, because there is a lot of perception that, well, it doesn't make money or it's not going to go to millions and millions and millions of people. Not everyone, just some. And so how do we reframe or at least set the table of what this could look like? And I will say I'm heartbroken when I heard about Participant because we did work with them for probably over 10 years. And I will also say, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this because you're all change makers, when the earth cracks, it's sad, but there's new sprouts. And what we're seeing is, especially if you saw that huge advertisement in, I think it was Variety or Hollywood Reporter, where 60 different celebrities signed on, big celebrities, as soon as Participant, said they were exiting and said, this cannot be. We cannot allow this. This must continue. So it all of a sudden, when you have a lead ship, everybody's like, oh, they're doing it. Yeah, they're doing it. That's fine. They're doing it. When the lead ship disappears, we have to do something. And I think it's opened up an opportunity to say, we're looking at the heroes, and they are us.
Yes. Thank you for that. That was great. I agree. I also think part of my job in this world is because people, it's all a chain, right? We're an all interconnected system. So funders are responding to what's happening in the ecosystem. We're responding. We have to work within a framework of, Hollywood and entertainment. So part of what we're also trying to do is not just, we're going to do amazing stories and hope to model this, but to really start to shift the systems themselves, because we're one organization, but part of that momentum is saying, helping people understand the power story, how you can use it differently, how creators and studios, and hopefully my hope is if we're successful, studios could make money doing a different kind of storytelling that still hits all these marks. So I think there is a numbers game in there somewhere, but you have to change the system. And so one of the things that I think is slightly different, that what we're trying to, which also makes it much harder, is you're trying to change a lot of things. You're trying to get momentum behind, we all need to maybe think about this differently. And that if everything is sort of evaporating and going away, it's on us to adjust and say, okay, what is a new normal? What's a new future for all of this? And how can we meet those folks and also try and push them in the direction we'd like them to go? So it's a lot of work, but it's fun. Yes.
It is. And I think that's a good place to end, if that's all right.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.